The American Civil War is perhaps one of the most influential events in American history. It's events that led up to it and afterwards have changed the landscape of America, and its outcome even affects America to this day. However, for such an important event, schools generally oversimplify the war, and as such has caused some misconceptions within the past decades. So let's start from the beginning. How did this happen, and what were the causes? The problems that eventually grew to be the Civil War started back when English settlers first colonized the land. You see, those that colonized in the South found that there wasn't an abundance of resources as their northern counterparts. However, there was one resource that they did have more of: cotton. However, cotton is very expensive to farm and it requires a lot of manual labor. Then the South at the time didn't have the economy to support that kind of business structure, so they turned to a very common practice at the time: slavery. But as the world industrialized, countries realized that they no longer needed slavery. However, the South was holding on to this. Slavery had brought them wealth and livelihood. To ask them to give it up would destroy their entire way of living. This all came to a head at the election of 1860, where the four main candidates were John Breckinridge, John Bell, Stephen Douglas, and Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln campaigned on the idea that slavery was inherently wrong, and the South were obviously terrified of him, and they knew that they would be fine as long as he didn't win. And then Lincoln won. The South were obviously terrified of him, and tried to fight back by saying that the Fugitive Slave Clause made slavery in the Constitution. Feeling the walls closing in, the South felt it as an inevitability that they would have to give up their slaves. In response to the pressure, one state decides to rebel. South Carolina secedes the Union. Soon more states joined the Confederacy, including Alabama, Virginia, and Texas along with the others. They founded their nation on the basis of a slave economy, with their vice president even going as far as to say, "Our new government is founded upon exactly the opposite idea. Its foundations are laid. Its cornerstone rests upon the great truth that the Negro is not equal to the white man, that slavery subordination to the superior race is his natural and normal condition." After forming the Confederacy, the Union couldn't let this act of rebellion go through. They had to stop it. War hadn't broken out yet, but it was inevitable what was coming, so they prepared. The North had a bigger population than the South, so they thought they could easily beat the Confederacy. However, the Confederacy would have to fight a defensive war, so they could more easily fight without having to use up as much manpower. The North had more factories than the South and better railways. However, the South had better generals and a better understanding of war. The Southern Army was led by General Robert E. Lee, while the North was led by General Ulysses S. Grant. All of this buildup and tension eventually led up to Fort Sumter, where the South were trying to take control over the Union-controlled Fort Sumter that was inside Southern territory. Nobody died in this exchange, but that didn't matter. The point is that Americans had fired on Americans, and such the Civil War had officially begun. While the South were fighting in order to keep the institute of slavery, that wasn't the goal of the North. They weren't fighting to abolish slavery at all. They were fighting to keep the Union together, to prevent the South from seceding. They didn't care if any slaves were freed, they just cared about the Union staying together. And thus would ensue the deadliest event this nation has ever seen, with a total of 620,000 people dying in the Civil War, nearly as much as all other casualties America has seen in all of its other conflicts combined. Its outcome and ramifications affected the rest of the 19th, 20th, and 21st century, and will forever be known as the most important war America has ever fought.